It's strange how some stories pull you in from the very first moment. This one began with a cold night, one of those nights where the wind feels alive and the silence is heavy, almost watching you. And as I listened, I felt that same strange tension, like something big was hiding in the dark. They say every year when this week comes around, the memories return. The rancher never talked about them, but the people in town always whispered. They said that Christmas night changed him forever and no one knew exactly how. But the way the story starts, it doesn't feel like some wild legend. It feels real, quiet, almost too ordinary. A remote ranch sitting under a sky thick with winter clouds, snow packed against the wooden fence, a single lantern glowing in the cold, nothing dramatic, nothing unusual, just a man finishing another long, lonely day. And yet I could feel it. Something was approaching, something he couldn't see coming. Maybe it was the way the wind hit the windows. Maybe it was the way the animals grew restless. Or maybe it was simply the kind of silence that warns you before anything else does. All I know is that night had a weight to it, a sense of fate moving closer, step by slow step. And sitting with this story, I found myself leaning in, wanting to know why everyone still talks about that moment. That moment when everything shifted, and the rancher's life took a turn no one could have predicted. The more I learned about this man, the more I understood why people spoke his name with a mix of respect and sadness. He wasn't the kind of rancher you see in old stories, full of loud confidence and easy smiles. No, he was the quiet kind. The kind who carried his past like a heavy coat, worn every day, even when the sun was shining. People said he used to laugh once, years ago, but no one could remember the sound anymore. It had faded the way old paint fades in the sun, slowly, until one day it's just gone. And each winter, especially around Christmas, something in him seemed to sink even deeper into silence. He lived far from town, farther than most would ever choose. A long dirt path, uneven and rocky, stretched between his ranch and the nearest neighbor. It wasn't that he hated people. He just didn't seem to know what to do with them anymore. He woke before dawn, worked through every hour of daylight, and ended his evenings in that same steady rhythm he had lived for years. Feed the cattle, fix the fences, check the barns, lock the doors, and sit alone at a table made for more than one. What struck me most was how everything around him seemed frozen in time, almost untouched. The house still carried the scent of old pine wood, the kind that lasts decades. The rocking chair on the porch creaked even when no one sat in it. And the boots by his doorway always stayed perfectly aligned, as if someone else once placed them there and he never moved them. There was a story in the stillness, one he didn't tell, but one the house whispered in its own way. People in town never pushed him for details. They respected his space but felt a quiet worry whenever winter settled in. Some said he had lost someone he loved dearly. Others believed tragedy had shaped him long before he ever bought that ranch. The truth, as far as anyone knew, was that every year, when Christmas week arrived, he withdrew even more. He worked harder, slept less, and looked like a man trying to outrun the calendar. But even with all that, there was something undeniably strong about him, a kind of rugged endurance. He wasn't fragile or broken. He was just alone. The kind of alone that doesn't fade with time. The kind that becomes part of a person. And still he kept going. Day after day, season after season. Winters that cracked the earth. Summers that burned the fields. Storms that knocked down fences. He faced all of it without complaint. Not because he wanted to prove anything, but because survival was simply what he did. His hands were rough, scarred, and marked by years of hard work. His face carried lines that told the story of weather, labor, silence, and something deeper, something like sorrow. On most days, the sound of the ranch was ordinary. Cows moving slowly across the field. The steady rhythm of his boots on the porch. The clink of metal tools. The wind brushing past the trees like a tired whisper. But around Christmas, the ranch felt different. Even the animals seemed to sense it. They moved slower. The dogs watched him carefully, and he himself walked with an air of distraction, like he was remembering something he wished he could forget. Inside his home, the walls were lined with small details that revealed who he used to be. A faded photo of a smiling couple stood on a shelf, dusty but untouched. A worn-out jacket with initials sewn into the collar hung behind the door. A small carved figurine sat on the windowsill, something clearly handmade, maybe by him, maybe for him. These small pieces of his life were hints of a past he didn't talk about, and he kept to this quiet world year after year. For him, the ranch wasn't just land. It was a refuge, a prison, a promise, maybe all three at once. He rarely left it except for supplies. He didn't celebrate holidays. He didn't visit town gatherings. He didn't join neighbors for dinners or barbecues. He simply stayed in his space, moving through life with the same patient, lonely rhythm. What made his story so compelling to me was the contrast between who he was on the outside and what everyone sensed inside him. He wasn't cruel or harsh. He had a gentle way with animals and a soft voice that rarely rose above conversation level. When people spoke to him, he listened. When someone needed help, he showed up quietly, did the work, nodded, and left. No thanks needed, no attention wanted, but he kept his distance. Always. Like a man who had built walls so high even he had forgotten what the other side looked like. Yet, despite everything, people admired him. There's a certain kind of respect people give to someone who carries their pain without making others carry it too. He never burdened anyone, never asked for anything, never caused trouble. He simply existed in a steady, grounded way that somehow made people feel safe, even if he wasn't safe within himself. And then there was that week, the one the whole town whispered about whenever the cold set in. The week when something shifted inside him. The week when he looked more tense than usual, more distant, almost like he was bracing for something. No one knew what exactly, but they could see it in his eyes, a tightness, a quiet storm. That was the week he kept closer watch on the windows. The week he walked slower at night, listening to the wind. The week he barely slept at all. Even the dogs stayed near him, sensing his unease, following him around the property like shadows. And though he expected that week to be difficult, he had no idea it would bring something unexpected, something that would shake the silence of his ranch and break the pattern of his lonely winters, something he could never have prepared for, no matter how many times he relived the memories that haunted him. Something that would start not with a sign, not with a warning, but with a simple, startling sound that changed everything. A sound that would arrive on Christmas night and pull him into the moment that would challenge everything he believed, everything he feared, and everything he thought he had already lost. That Christmas night didn't arrive with fireworks or storms or anything loud. It slipped in quietly, the way snow settles on a roof without anyone noticing. The air outside was sharp, the kind that bites at your lungs and makes every breath feel colder than the one before. The sky was heavy, carrying the weight of an unfinished storm, and the wind moved in long, slow waves, brushing against the ranch like it was searching for a way inside. Everything felt still, too still. Even as a listener to this story, I could almost sense the tension building, like something was waiting in the dark, holding its breath. Inside the rancher's house, the room was dim. A single lamp cast a warm circle of light over the wooden table where he sat, hands resting on the grain, eyes unfocused. He wasn't reading. He wasn't eating. He was just sitting, staring into the kind of quiet that only winter knows how to create. His dogs lay near the fireplace, their bodies relaxed but their ears alert. They were watching him, watching the door, watching the night. Animals sense things before humans do, and they already knew something was coming. The rancher lifted his mug, but the coffee inside had gone cold. He didn't seem to notice. His mind was far away, drifting back to a memory he couldn't escape. Every year this week pulled him backward, into shadows, into loss, into moments he never spoke about. And every year he tried to swallow those memories down and keep moving. But that night they were closer than usual, closer than he wanted. Outside, the ranch stretched out in darkness. The barn doors were shut tight. The horses stood still, shifting their weight nervously. A loose piece of tin on the roof tapped softly with each gust of wind, a steady, unnerving rhythm. The kind that makes you look over your shoulder. The kind that makes you listen harder to the silence. The rancher rose to check the windows, something he had already done twice that evening. He wasn't even sure what he was expecting to see. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. His boots echoed lightly against the wooden floor as he walked from room to room, eyes scanning the shadows outside. It was a routine he didn't think about anymore, just something he did, like breathing. When he reached the front door, he paused. There was a feeling, one that slid into his chest with cold fingers, a sense that the night wasn't finished with him yet. He stood there for a long moment, hand hovering over the lock, not turning it, just holding it, listening. And that's when it happened. A sound. So small at first he thought he imagined it. A tiny, fragile tap, like a branch brushing against the door. He waited, breath held, eyes narrowing just slightly. For a long moment there was nothing but the wind. Then it came again. Louder this time. Not a branch, not the wind, a knock. 3 slow, uneven taps. The dogs sprang up instantly, hackles raised, low growls vibrating in their chests. They moved toward the door with caution, their bodies tense, tails stiff. The rancher felt his heartbeat shift, steady but alert. No one ever came out this far, not at night, and never on Christmas. He approached the door carefully, each step measured, each breath controlled. The air inside the house felt colder suddenly, like the night had seeped through the walls. He placed a hand on the doorknob, palm flat against the metal, feeling how chilled it was. Whoever or whatever stood outside had brought the winter with them. For a moment he didn't open it. He simply stood there, listening to the soft breaths of his dogs, the distant rustle of snow, and the quiet hum of fear he didn't want to admit he felt. His mind raced through possibilities. A lost traveler, a neighbor in trouble, someone hurt, or something worse. He had lived long enough to know that danger liked to hide in unexpected places, and he wasn't a man who ignored instincts. Not on a night like this. The knock came again, this time sharper, more desperate. A trembling sound as if the knuckles on the other side barely had the strength to make contact. The rancher swallowed once, then turned the knob. The door creaked open slowly, a slice of warm lamplight spilling into the dark. And standing there, barely upright, was a figure. Small, thin, wrapped in clothing soaked through from the cold. Their breath came in short, uneven bursts. Their eyes, wide with fear, pain, or both, met his, pleading without a single word. The rancher froze. His dog stopped growling. The wind outside seemed to hush itself. The figure swayed slightly, clutching something close to their chest. Their lips parted, but no sound came out. They were too cold to speak, too weak to explain why they had come to his door on the deadliest night of winter. In that moment the rancher felt something shift inside him. A memory, a flash of another Christmas, another knock, another cold figure on his doorstep, another moment where he had hesitated and paid a price he never forgot. This time the hesitation lasted only a heartbeat. "Come in," he said softly. His voice didn't rise, didn't shake. It was steady, almost gentle. He stepped aside and guided the stranger in, closing the door behind them with a quiet thud that felt like sealing out the entire world. The warmth of the room wrapped around the stranger immediately, but it didn't thaw the tension in the rancher's chest. He didn't know who they were. He didn't know what danger they carried with them. But he could see it clearly. The fear in their eyes wasn't just from the cold. Something else had driven them here. Something that might still be out there in the dark. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. He simply supported the stranger, leading them toward the fire, his mind running through every possibility. He had faced storms, coyotes, thieves, and tragedies that would break most people, but something about this moment felt different. He didn't know why, not yet, but he would soon. The stranger didn't speak at first. They couldn't. Their lips were cracked from the cold, and their hands trembled so violently it looked like they might drop whatever they were clutching to their chest. The rancher could see the exhaustion in every small movement, the way their shoulders sagged, the way their head tilted forward as if even holding it up had become too heavy. But it was their eyes that held him in place. They weren't just tired. They were scared. The kind of fear you don't get from a bad storm or a long walk in the snow. This was fear of someone chasing, fear of someone following, fear that didn't fade even after stepping inside a warm room. He lowered them gently into a chair near the fire. The heat spread slowly, warming their clothes, their hands, their face, but they still didn't let go of the object in their arms. It was wrapped in a faded blanket, edges torn, fabric stiff with frost. Whatever it was, they were protecting it with their whole body, shielding it like their life depended on it. The rancher didn't touch it. He didn't push. He'd lived a long life, long enough to know that people revealed things in their own time. He just knelt down, placed a wool blanket over their shoulders, and moved to the stove without saying a word. He poured hot water into a metal cup and set it in their hands. They tried to hold it steady, but the cup shook so hard he had to wrap his own hands around theirs for a moment until the tremors eased. "Drink," he said quietly. They took a small sip, then another. Color began to return slowly to their cheeks. The shaking eased little by little. The dog stayed close, not growling anymore, but watching, curious, cautious, alert. Animals know when something is wrong. And that night they didn't take their eyes off the stranger. Minutes passed, stretched thin by the crackling fire and the steady hum of the wind outside. The rancher waited patiently. He had questions, too many questions, but he didn't voice any of them. Instead, he watched the stranger breathe in the warmth, watched their shoulders loosen, watched the fear in their eyes shift into something else, something closer to desperation than panic. Finally, their voice broke through the silence. "Please don't send me back." The rancher felt something twist deep in his chest. It wasn't the words. It was the way they were spoken, soft, broken, like someone who had run out of places to hide. He stayed still, letting them speak at their own pace. The stranger swallowed hard and continued. "They're looking for me." That was all they said at first, but it was enough. The rancher didn't flinch. He'd been expecting danger. Not hoping for it, not inviting it, but expecting it in that quiet way people do when life has taught them to recognize the early signs of trouble. He pulled out a chair and sat across from them, leaning forward slightly. "Who?" he asked, voice low, steady. The stranger hesitated. Their hands tightened around the bundle in their arms. The blanket shifted just enough for the rancher to see what was inside, and when he did, a jolt ran through him. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't supplies. It wasn't anything he had imagined. It was a child. No more than a few months old, cheeks flushed from the cold, tiny fists curled against the blanket. The baby stirred softly, eyes closed, unaware of the fear wrapped around them like another layer of cloth. The rancher felt the breath leave his chest. He hadn't expected this. Not in 1,000 winters. The stranger's voice shook. "They want the child, they want to take him." The rancher looked up slowly, meeting their eyes. The fear there was raw, sharp, and painfully real, and for a moment time seemed to pause between them. He saw more than a desperate parent. He saw someone on the edge of breaking, someone who had risked everything for that small bundle, someone who had run through the darkest night with hope as thin as a thread. He should have told them to leave. He should have said it wasn't his fight. He should have kept himself safe, kept his quiet life untouched, kept his ghosts buried where they belonged. He knew that taking them meant stepping into danger he didn't fully understand. He knew winter nights brought not just cold but consequences, but something inside him didn't let him turn away. Not this time. He nodded once, slow but sure. "You're safe here." The stranger's breath caught, a small, stunned sound that almost broke under the weight of relief. Their shoulders sagged, and for the first time since arriving, their eyes softened. But the rancher wasn't finished. "No one's taking that child," he added. It was a promise he didn't speak lightly, a promise that pulled something old and painful from deep inside him, something he had tried to forget, because years ago he had faced a night not so different from this one, a night where someone needed help, a night where hesitation cost him more than he could ever replace. And he had lived with that memory ever since, carrying it like a silent scar. He would not make the same choice twice. The stranger exhaled shakily, clutching the child closer. The rancher stood and walked to the door, checking the lock again, sliding the deadbolt into place with a soft click that echoed through the quiet room. Then he stepped outside onto the porch, the cold biting instantly at his skin, and scanned the darkness. Nothing moved, nothing stirred, but he felt it. Danger wasn't far. It rarely was when people were desperate enough to chase someone through the night. He stayed out there a moment longer, letting the cold sharpen his senses, letting the quiet settle into something almost like warning. When he finally stepped back inside, he closed the door firmly behind him. The stranger looked up at him, eyes wide, waiting for any sign of doubt. There was none. He walked past them to grab another log for the fire, his movements slow and deliberate. The flames grew stronger, casting warm light across the room. The stranger reached out instinctively, letting the baby feel the heat. The rancher watched them quietly, something old stirring in his chest, something he thought he'd buried forever. He didn't know who was coming. He didn't know how dangerous they were. He didn't know what the next hours would bring. But he did know one thing with absolute certainty. He had chosen his side. The house felt warmer, but the air inside carried a new kind of tension, one that settled deep into the walls and made every small sound feel sharper than it should. The stranger sat close to the fire, rocking the baby slowly, whispering words so soft they barely stirred the air. The rancher watched them for a moment, seeing the way the stranger's arms wrapped protectively around the child, how their hands tightened a little every time the wind pushed harder against the windows. It was clear they had been running for a long time, long enough for fear to become instinct, long enough for exhaustion to become a kind of armor. The rancher moved through the room quietly, checking the windows, the latches, the locks, twice, then a third time. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Years alone had taught him that danger didn't knock gently. It came fast, hard, and ruthless. And something about the way the stranger spoke, the way their voice trembled even when they tried to steady it, told him this wasn't going to be a simple situation. When he finally took a seat across from them, the stranger looked up. Their eyes were red from cold and worry, but there was a spark there too, something like hope trying to push through all the fear. The rancher didn't know what to do with that. Hope was a complicated thing. It could make people brave, but it could also get them hurt. The stranger swallowed, then finally spoke again. "They won't stop," they whispered. "Not tonight, not ever." The rancher leaned forward just slightly. "Who are they?" A long silence settled over the room. The fire popped. The dogs shifted. Outside, the wind scraped across the side of the house like a warning. Then, with a weak but steady voice, the stranger told him everything. A group of men, dangerous, lawless, determined, had been hunting them for days. The stranger had worked on the outskirts of a settlement far from here, far enough that no one from town had heard the story. They had discovered something they weren't meant to see, something the men wanted buried. And worse, the baby wasn't theirs. He belonged to someone else, someone powerful, someone the men intended to use. The child had value to them, value tied to money, leverage, secrets, maybe all three. When the stranger realized what they planned to do, they fled. They didn't think. They just ran, through the forests, over the hills, across the frozen ground, with nothing but a blanket and the hope that someone, anyone, might help them before it was too late. The rancher listened without interrupting, but his jaw tightened. His hands curled into slow fists against his legs. He spoke only once during all of it. "And they followed you here." The stranger nodded. "They're close," they whispered. "I heard them behind me just before I reached your gate." The rancher felt the words hit like a cold knife. Danger wasn't approaching, it was already here. It was probably out there somewhere in the dark, watching, waiting for the right moment. The rancher's gaze drifted to the door, then to the windows. His mind moved through memories he avoided, memories that came uninvited at this time every year. Memories of a night he couldn't forget, a night where he hadn't acted fast enough. A night where he had lost someone he cared for, lost them to men who had no mercy. He felt that old ache surface in his chest, tight and familiar, but instead of freezing him, it pushed him forward. "We'll deal with them," he said finally. The stranger looked startled. "You don't even know who they are." "I know enough." He stood, walked to a small cabinet near the hallway, and opened it. Inside was a rifle, clean, well-kept, ready. The stranger stiffened, eyes wide, but the rancher shook his head. "This isn't for you," he said quietly. "It's for them." The dog stood up too, tail stiff and alert, sensing the shift in the room. The rancher loaded the rifle, each click echoing through the cabin like a promise. The sound wasn't loud, but it was final. The stranger's voice shook. "You could get hurt." The rancher didn't look up. "People get hurt every day. Hurt doesn't scare me." He paused then, breathing slowly, letting his next words settle inside him before he said them out loud. "Losing someone does." There it was, truth breaking through the thick silence. The stranger didn't ask for details. They didn't need to. The rancher's voice carried the weight of a story no one had heard. Minutes passed. The fire cracked and threw warm light across the wooden floor. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the danger circling the property. The stranger rocked gently, eyes never leaving the rancher, as if trying to understand why a man who owed them nothing would risk everything. The rancher walked to the front door and listened, really listened. The wind, the creak of frozen branches, the faint rustle of snow shifting under its own weight, nothing else. Not yet. He checked the back door, then the windows again, then walked outside onto the porch, rifle in hand. The cold slapped him instantly, but he didn't flinch. He scanned the yard, the barn, the tree line. Snow stretched out like a pale blanket under the moonlight. Still. Quiet. But quiet was often the most dangerous moment of all. He didn't stay out long, just long enough to read the night. Just long enough to know he hadn't been wrong, something was out there. When he stepped back inside, the stranger's eyes met his with a silent question. He didn't sugarcoat it. "They'll be here soon." The stranger held the baby closer, breath trembling. The rancher locked the door behind him, lowered the lamp slightly, and guided them toward the safest corner of the cabin, behind the thickest wall, away from the windows. The baby stirred softly, making a small sound that filled the room with a strange warmth. The rancher stared at the tiny face for a moment, then at the stranger's frightened expression. He took a slow breath. "This ends tonight," he said. Not as a threat, not as a boast, but as a man who had lived through too much loss and refused to let it happen again. The hours that followed felt stretched thin, like the night was holding itself together by a single fragile thread. Every sound mattered, every shift in the wind, every crack of ice settling over the roof. The firelight flickered softly across the cabin walls, casting shadows that moved like quiet warnings. The strangers sat on the floor with their back against the wall, cradling the baby close, whispering to him in a voice barely louder than a breath. The rancher could feel the fear in the room, but he also sensed something else. Determination, the kind that rises only when someone has been pushed too far. He paced slowly, the rifle cradled in his arms, listening to the night the way a man listens when danger circles close. The dogs stayed low, their ears twitching at every shift of air. Once in a while, one of them let out a low whine, the kind that says they know something is coming but can't tell from which direction. The rancher trusted their instincts. He trusted his own even more. Outside, the wind suddenly changed, not in volume but in tone. It wasn't the casual, sweeping gusts of earlier. This was sharper, broken by small, irregular pauses, the kind of pattern that didn't belong to nature. The rancher walked to the window and tilted his head just slightly, eyes narrowing as he watched the edge of the tree line. Movement. Not much. Just a flicker. A shape shifting between branches. Too slow to be the wind. Too intentional to be an animal. He stepped back from the window and looked toward the stranger. Their eyes widened the moment they saw his expression. A silent message passed between them. Asterisk, they're here. The rancher lowered the lamps even more until the cabin dimmed to a soft amber glow. Darkness outside pressed closer against the windows, turning the glass into black mirrors. He motioned for the stranger to move farther into the corner, and they obeyed without hesitation, shielding the baby with their whole body. Then came the moment he had been expecting. Footsteps. Slow at first, crunching through the crust of the frozen ground. One pair, then another, then more, spaced apart like a group spreading out to surround the place. The rancher counted them in his mind. 3, 4, maybe 5. Hard to tell in the wind, but enough to know this wasn't a bluff. They weren't trying to sneak. They wanted him to know they were here. Wanted fear to do half their work for them. The rancher stood in the center of the room, rifle steady, breath quiet. His heart didn't race. His hands didn't shake. If anything, he felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. The kind that comes when a man realizes he's been preparing for this moment his whole life, even without knowing it. A voice rang out from the dark, sharp and cold. "Come out," another followed. "We know you've got them." The stranger flinched. The baby stirred but didn't cry. The rancher didn't move an inch. He didn't shout back. He knew men like this. They fed on panic. They wanted to provoke him, push him, make him reveal something. Silence, on the other hand, made them uncertain. The footsteps came closer, slow, testing. The porch boards creaked under someone's weight. One of the dogs growled, a deep rumble rising from its chest. The stranger pressed a hand over their mouth, fighting the urge to breathe too loud. Then another voice spoke, much closer. "Last chance. Give us the child and nobody has to get hurt." The rancher felt something old and heavy ignite inside him. A memory. A night long gone. A promise he had failed to keep once before. His fingers tightened on the rifle. His jaw clenched. That sentence, "give us the child," cut straight through the years and dragged him back to the moment he lost someone he had been too late to save. He wouldn't be late this time. He stepped forward silently, positioning himself between the stranger and the door. The dogs flanked him naturally, bodies low, ready. He slowly exhaled through his nose, grounding himself, letting every decision he was about to make settle deep into his bones. He didn't know how this night would end. He didn't care. All he cared about was the child behind him, the stranger who had risked everything, and the truth in his chest that said he couldn't stand aside. Not again. The voice outside grew impatient. "Fine, your choice." There was a scraping sound, boots shifting in the snow, rifles being raised, metal brushing against jackets stiff with frost. The rancher closed his eyes for one brief moment, gathering the strength that had lived inside him all along, waiting for a night like this. Then he heard it. A click. Not loud but unmistakable. The safety of a gun being switched off. The rancher's eyes snapped open. He pivoted to the left just as a shot shattered the quiet, splintering a wooden plank on the porch. The stranger gasped. The baby jolted. The dogs barked fiercely, launching themselves toward the door. Another shot. This one hit the window frame, spraying small shards of wood across the room. The rancher didn't hesitate. He moved with a speed that surprised even him, crossing the space toward the front door and taking cover behind the heavy bookshelf. His voice stayed low but sharp. "Stay down." The stranger obeyed instantly, curling over the baby, shielding him with their arms and shoulders. The rancher steadied his rifle, aimed toward the door, and waited for the next movement. Footsteps shuffled. Someone cursed under their breath. Someone else whispered too loudly, revealing their position near the corner of the porch. The rancher exhaled slowly, braced himself, and prepared to defend the only people who had stepped into his life in years. Everything inside him tightened, the grief, the anger, the memories he had tried so long to bury. They rose now not as pain but as purpose. He wasn't the same man he had been the last time fate demanded courage from him. He wasn't hesitant. He wasn't haunted, not anymore. He was ready. As the intruders gathered their courage for another strike, the rancher shifted his grip, steadied his aim, and stepped forward into the fight he knew he could not walk away from. The night that had brought fear now held something else entirely. It held the moment where everything was about to change.